This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Another tear just burst from the side of your eye.
That is All This Love by Russo and Winberg, a song about true love over time and a deeply authentic relationship between two people who are growing and changing together, because that's the point. And I thought that song was a perfect intro to our topic today, because on today's episode, we are doing a deep dive into what it really takes to fix a relationship in a deep and enduring way. If you've ever listened to this program before, that I am intensely passionate about not just personal growth work, but really evidence-based approaches that we know are going to meaningfully and genuinely lead people into real and lasting transformational change, particularly when it comes to relationships. And if you've listened to me before, you will also know that I often talk about the fact that almost all of what passes these days for couples counseling is conducted by practitioners who are not qualified to be working with couples. They are not practicing evidence-based forms of couples counseling, and that there are really negative consequences to this. At best, it's a big waste of time and money when somebody shows up for help and it's ineffective. But at worst, this can lead to a real tragedy for not just a couple, but a family. Because if a couple shows up with a sincere desire to get help and connects with somebody who genuinely doesn't know how to help them, that can be their one and only shot at saving their relationship, saving their family, and it heads to divorce. And, yes, kids are resilient, and the life path of children whose parents divorce is different than it is for kids whose parents figure out to have a not just secure and stable, but happy, healthy relationship that they get to model for them. So there are real and important things on the table. And that is why I'm so passionate about this topic. And that's why, as the clinical director of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching, my number one mission is to always make sure that every person who comes to us for help, particularly at a fork in the road moment for their relationship, is getting connected to a really good marriage and family therapist who specializes in this work and who also practices evidence-based forms of couples counseling and who can really help them. And certainly we do that in a variety of ways. We vet the heck out of everybody who applies. And we look at education and their experience, but also we are looking for strong skills in very specific evidence-based forms of couples counseling, and especially a very important one called emotionally focused couples therapy. This is powerhouse of growth for couples, and it leads to real and lasting fundamental change. And it's the kind of counseling that people come out the other side and they don't have to try anymore. Like, they have changed because of the experience of growth. It's tremendous, it's important, and it's a lot of what we do around here. And I wanted to talk with you about this particular type of couples counseling today so that you understand it and can make educated and informed decisions if you're at a crossing the roads moment for your relationship. And today, to dive into this, I have invited one of my colleagues on this program, Anastasia Sams. Anastasia is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works alongside me here at Growing Self. She and I have worked together for years. She is phenomenal in many ways, and she is a true expert in emotionally focused therapy. And so I invited her today to talk with us about this important subject and to share her wisdom with us. And Anastasia, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
Again, I should say, actually, it's just occurring to me that we've done this a couple of times on different topics over the years. I know we connected last year where you shared your wisdom around grief and loss. And I know we talked a while ago about your insight into people who are seeking to increase their self-esteem. And so wonderful conversations, but we haven't talked before specifically about emotionally focused couples therapy. And it's time. So, to dive in, I'm hoping that we can just start our conversation with just a general overview about what emotionally focused couples therapy is and how you perceive it as being really different from a lot of other approaches.
Yeah, I think the premise behind emotionally focused couples therapy is that it's very easy for couples to get into a negative cycle of communication where either they're arguing about the same things or their arguments are never really getting fully resolved and building on top of each other. And so the goal of EFT is to really understand for each partner what the more vulnerable emotions and needs are that are getting lost in translation.
Mhm.
And then after revealing that, helping them to create a new, healthier cycle of communicating that incorporates that more vulnerable expression of emotions and needs.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that's different because a lot of other theoretical orientations focus more on the thoughts or
Mhm.
I think the trying to change behaviors, but not really looking at the root cause of those behaviors and
Mhm.
addressing those first.
Mhm. That right there is so important because I think a lot of times when couples show up, that's what they think it's going to be. Like, we're going to
Yeah.
tell them, okay, here's how to communicate, or like
Right.
whatever, some do this, not that. And they're going to be like, okay, great. And then
Yeah.
that's going to change something. And what we know and what EFT is exactly what you're saying, which is that we can tell you what to do differently.
Yeah.
And if you feel upset or angry or hurt or
Right.
resentful or whatever the thing, afraid, what are, the things are,
Yeah.
you will not be able to do the behaviors. And so
Right.
your approach, that EFT, it's like we have to go into what is really happening on a deeper level and get that sorted out. And then
Yes.
the changes that
Yeah.
stick. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. And you also said something that I thought was so important, which is that, oh, I don't know the way you phrased it. I won't phrase it as nicely as you did, but you said that couples in distress have like predictable patterns and
Yeah.
ways of relating that become problematic. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I almost want to like normalize, like this is where people
Yeah.
start and just what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's very normal, especially because too, each person has things from their family history, ways of attaching or building relationships that have some root in how they grew up or the messages that they received
Hmm.
growing up. And so a lot of times there are triggers that neither partner knows about that are getting actively triggered. And then the way of responding to those triggers is often rooted in something from earlier on, whether it's early childhood or early
Hmm.
adulthood. And so then those ways of reacting start to create this pattern and this cycle
Hmm.
that really create a feeling of distance
Hmm.
from each other. But it's something that is very normal and also something that is very much reversible as well.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of one of the common patterns with a couple who is maybe getting triggered by each other and who isn't even
Yeah.
aware a lot of
Right.
times? The person getting triggered doesn't even understand why they're feeling the way they are, much less their partner. What do you see as common iterations of some of those patterns and what's going on when people first show up to you?
Yeah, I think typically what I see is there's usually one partner who is more likely to express their feelings outwardly to their partner, but sometimes in a way that maybe there's a tone or it's very much can come across as harsh, but really it's just this trying to connect
Hmm.
and share, I'm feeling hurt. But it
Hmm.
may come out as criticism.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is then there's typically another partner who, when they hear that, they completely shut down
Hmm.
and withdraw. And then that continues because then, that first partner sees that shutdown and that withdrawal and then tries to communicate even more
Yeah.
because now they're not feeling heard, which then results in the other partner shutting down even more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then that's starting over and over again.
So they get stuck in this
Yeah.
cycle almost when one person is, you never talk to me. And the other person's like,
Right.
I got to go. And
Yeah.
like that self perpetuating thing. And
Yeah.
what would you say starts to happen to people in a relationship if they're stuck in that
Mm.
very normal, common cycle
Yeah.
for a period of time? Because it's hard to unwind it yourself, right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you see starting to happen to people when they get trapped in that?
Yeah, I think a few things. There's definitely a frustration that's felt on both
Mhm.
sides. And I think there is resentment that
Yeah.
can build up. So feelings of resentment. And then
Mhm.
I think underneath the surface are a lot of feelings of sadness or questioning of self worth or does my partner really care
Mhm.
about me?
Yeah. What so like why are they doing this? Why are they treating me this way? And I don't know if you've noticed this with your cases, but I see in mine is that over time it like people can begin to erroneously believe that this is the way my partner is because it's based
Yeah.
in evidence. Like they're
Hmm.
just an angry person. They will never be
Right.
satisfied. They will never be happy. Or
Yeah.
this person is just like the most emotionally immature person. They cannot have a
Right.
conversation. There's this like
Yeah.
narrative that starts to get created that
Yeah.
is based on people's experiences, but that gets so diabolical because if it's who your partner is
Right.
fundamentally as a person, like where do you go from there? It seems like
Yeah.
the only choice is to break up. Yeah. But I heard you say that's not true. It's
Yeah.
reversible. And
Mm.
that's where that emotionally focused
Yeah.
therapy approach comes in. That's the only way to really get out of this. Is that what you were saying? Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with that, it can be uncomfortable work at first because a
Mhm.
lot of times when you're talking about the more vulnerable feelings and emotions, those are typically things that don't get talked about, especially once this cycle has been going on for quite a
Mhm.
while. And so it can even be hard to believe your partner when you hear them say, like, I am sad when I
Mhm.
withdraw. Like when I'm being critical, it's because I feel unheard.
Yeah. The other partner's like, that's not true.
Yeah.
You're just a horrible
They're
person.
like, I've never heard you say that before.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that, but as the work continues and both partners lean into that discomfort, I think part of the work is understanding for each person just historically what they've learned about relationships and
Mhm.
communication and what some of those experiences have been that influence the way that
Mhm.
they present in their relationship.
Yeah.
And then also helping each person to start communicating like underneath the anger or
Mhm.
frustration or annoyance. I'm like, those are secondary emotions.
Yeah.
And they always have a traveling buddy that's more vulnerable. And instead of saying, I'm angry and now you're yelling,
Mhm.
the goal is to be able to say, I feel really unheard or I feel really
Mhm.
disappointed for the other partner to be able to hear that and show empathy and understanding towards that.
Yeah.
And then also express
Mhm.
what they feel as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you use the word vulnerability so many times. Why is helping your couples create that mutual vulnerability, which is hard to do? And especially, I think, without an
Yeah,
Anastasia sitting there, it can like disintegrate into a fight. And that's why really
right.
people need support to do this. But why is achieving that vulnerable space so important in your view and through the lens of emotionally focused couples therapy?
Yeah, I think it's so important because being in a relationship with someone is
Mhm.
super scary. Getting to that level of closeness
Yeah.
and intimacy, I think that there are a lot of fears that come up, then can
Mhm.
create this guardedness. But that vulnerability is so important to be able to deepen the intimacy and maintain that emotional
Mhm.
intimacy. And without that, then it's really just
Yeah.
the surface level of frustration and anger that kind of just
Mhm.
gets passed back and
Yeah,
forth.
that vulnerability is the doorway to that kind of the intimacy. And you used the term when we were first talking together too. You mentioned attachment a couple of times. And can you just like basic refresher on what attachment is and how that plays into this emotionally focused model?
Yeah. So attachment essentially is based off of your early childhood experiences with your caregivers. And so depending on what those experiences were, they affect how you attach or feel connected to your caregiver. And that attachment then influences the way that you connect with people later on in adulthood. And so there are a few different types. And so there's the secure attachment, that's the goal. That's always the goal. And then there's an anxious attachment and an avoidant attachment style as well. And so those can play a role because if I'm anxiously attached, then I may be the one who, like, when I try to communicate, it seems like I'm criticizing, but really, I'm really wanting connection. And there's this underlying fear that maybe I'm too much. Or if I have an avoidant attachment style, then I crave that connection as well. But I fear that I'm not enough. And so then I shut down. And so being able to understand that too is helpful.
Yeah, and how those attachment styles interplay. And that I always thought was one of the most fascinating things about this model because we also know because relationships are systems and people impact each other that if you take a perfect there is no such thing as a perfectly secure person, but hypothetically if there was such a thing as a perfectly secure
Right.
person and you
Yeah.
put them in a relationship with somebody who had a strong, say, avoidant attachment style, they would become more
Right.
anxious in response to that, to try to
Yeah.
get their needs met from somebody who had avoidant tendencies and vice versa. If you put a secure person in a
Right.
relationship with an anxious person, they're shut down a little bit because of that intensity. And I thought
Yeah.
that just blew my mind when I was first introduced to that idea. And to also, I think it's really helped me to think about that perfectly normal, healthy people who did not have adverse life experiences and are just fine in a
Right.
distressed relationship will begin to
Yeah.
appear as being anxious or and often
Right.
complementary avoidant because of the distress in the relationship, like
Yeah.
not necessarily some wounding that they're carrying on the inside too. And so that can be
Right.
really hard to tease
Yeah.
apart. Is that something that comes up for you in your
Yeah.
work? Is this something that a person carried into the relationship, or are they appearing this way because of the relationship? Or am I making this way too complicated than it
Yeah.
actually is?
No, no, that's a good question. I'm trying to think through. I think I
Mhm.
tend to see more of it being carried in, but I do think I have a few
Yeah.
examples where because of the relationship and that can then influence the person's
Yeah.
attachment style. And so then I think it's sorting through
Mhm.
that, like sorting through
Yeah.
the triggers
Yeah.
for each person.
Yeah, that where does it come from? When does it happen?
Yeah.
I could see how that would be so illuminating for a lot of the couples you work with, especially if there is like some old wounds. And to have a conversation like,
Right.
in order to feel safe in this relationship, you are going to have to get more of X from your partner. And what does
Yeah.
that look like? I could see that being super healing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, so helping couples understand each other on that deeper way, a level, the vulnerability, the attachment, and really taking a look at how it's all working together. And as we know, that insight isn't enough. What happens next after
Right.
couples are like, okay, I
Yeah.
understand why you screamed at me because of this, and I can make sense
Right.
to me now. But we can't stay there.
Yeah.
Where do you take people next?
Yeah. I think then it's learning to respond differently.
Ah, mhm,
And so being able to identify the emotions, those primary emotions,
mhm.
and being able to communicate those. And so, of course, you'll still get angry, but then taking a moment and thinking through, okay, what am I actually feeling underneath this anger? And then coming back and then having a discussion of I felt really hurt when
Yeah.
you did X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And so I think it sounds really nice and well packaged, but I think getting there is a little messy, and that's
Yeah.
okay too. That sometimes you get angry, you fall into your cycle, and
Mhm.
then you realize we just got into that cycle again. But here's actually what was going on for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, to be able to repair it. And that is, I think, incredibly important because that it's an experiential process where over time
Right.
people start thinking about themselves and their internal experience
Yeah.
differently and their partners differently.
Right.
And it's like this real, I don't know how else to say it, this transformational change. And I think that's
Yeah.
why, I don't know if you ever get this, but I have such a reaction because sometimes people will ask me, like, relationship advice questions. And I actually have one for you that we could talk through if
Okay.
you have time. But it's, so, Dr. Lisa, this is going on. What do I do in this situation? And it's
Right.
over a period of 16 to 20 weeks. I would like for you
Yeah.
to have this transformational experience because,
Right.
there's not do this and it'll change.
Yeah.
It's like this growth
Yeah.
thing. And that makes me sad sometimes because I think people are actually looking for an answer, that there is an answer, but it's not like an informational answer. It's an
Right.
experiential answer. Is that even
Yeah.
remotely coherent? I don't know if that.
No, that is. It makes sense. And I think too, especially in our culture, we're used to
Mhm.
being able to have an answer or something to solve the problem quickly.
Yeah,
And I think what's difficult is usually getting into that negative cycle of communication happens over
mm,
time. And so then unfortunately the process of undoing that and creating a new cycle
yeah,
also has to happen over time as well.
right. Yeah, that it's a process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, and I wanted to ask, and so you brought up the kind of cultural expectations around what fixing a relationship actually looks
Right.
like. And for some people, it's do this and then that. We know from our evidence based approach and the research is
Yeah.
that that does not, either it doesn't work or it doesn't work for long because it
Yeah.
is that kind of more superficial thing. But now, emotionally focused therapy has also gotten a little bit of criticism over the
Yeah.
years because there, I think, is also a cultural orientation towards
Right.
connecting through having face to face, emotionally intimate conversations about vulnerable
Yeah.
things and about our feelings. And that is not always, I don't want to say true, because like in different cultures or different
Yeah.
kind of ways of being, there are many different ways of
Right.
connecting and attaching. And so we know
Yeah.
attachment is always there. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that. Are there
Yeah.
people that you need to modify that for because, and not the attachment, not the vulnerability, but like the talking about feeling. Can I just say it? That's all like a white thing in some ways.
Yeah.
It's therapy, all kinds of
Yeah.
white women specifically, and like creating
Right.
attachment through like
Yeah.
conversations. Can you speak to that aspect of it a little bit? Because it's not
Yeah.
true for everybody. And that needs to be
Yeah.
honored, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think it really depends.
Hmm.
And I think that modifying it, the way that I tend to modify it is how can we communicate from an I feel perspective and
Yeah.
really take accountability for your feelings
Hmm.
instead of accusing or criticizing or and so I think that's probably and even something that, for example, some clients of color are used to having guards up when they are in the world in order
Yeah.
to and those are necessary really, especially in our country.
Right.
And so some of that work then is okay, how can you keep that guard up? But then when you come home, how can you let that guard down with your partner?
Yeah. 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 That's so honoring that there are different ways of relating in different contexts, but to bring that sort of softness into your relationship and
Right.
like that trust there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
That kind of both and piece.
Definitely.
Do you find that sometimes, and I'm thinking even a stereotypical man, and I don't want to gender stereotype because we also know very emotionally sensitive and very emotionally verbal men. That's a thing. But also, I mean, even thinking clients that I've had who are even Asian cultures sometimes, it's like
Mhm.
talking about their feelings is not their number one go to way of
Right.
connecting. And are
Yeah.
there other things that you can offer or help people to do to create that connection that really does play to their strengths and ways of being in the world?
Yeah.
And also just to say too, I think I've also seen relationships where one person is very highly focused on, I need you to talk about your feelings in order
Yeah.
for me to, and I need to talk about my feelings. And that's not like
Right.
a strength or a
Yeah.
like a natural, comfortable state. Do you ever
Right.
see that with your couples? And I'm curious what
Yeah.
you, are there alternatives or is it always like no, we have to talk about feelings.
I think it's a both
Mhm.
and. I think when I see that, a lot of it is deconstructing the messages that people have received
Yeah.
around emotions in general.
Mhm.
And so I think, that is something I have seen help a lot is being able to deconstruct those and then keep what's working,
Mm.
but also get rid of what's not working, especially for the relationship.
Mhm.
And I think also looking at the love languages as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I find that helps too.
Mm.
And I think of examples of using that example of one partner who's, I need you to talk about my emotions and I'm going to talk about mine.
Mhm.
There's a tendency for a lot of criticism to happen in,
Yeah.
in that example. And so I think about someone, if their partner, if their love language is words of affirmation,
Mhm.
then that can be really damaging.
Mhm.
And so looking at that as well.
Yeah, and just introducing that idea that not all people experience love in exactly the same
Yeah,
way, and that true love is appreciating and valuing your partner and understanding who they are and why
yeah,
they are the way they are, and like showing them love in the way that is meaningful to them, as opposed to
definitely.
that unconscious false belief I think we all fall into is like, you could be more like me. This would be so much better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Something I like to tell my couples too is to work towards the idea because I think it's so just natural and easy to say, you know what, these are your faults and these are my needs. You're not meeting my needs.
Right?
And so I like to help my couples work towards changing that mindset to,
Mhm.
okay, these are my growth areas that I'm going to be working on
Mhm.
and okay, these are your needs. So I'm going to do,
Yeah.
what I can to meet those needs.
Mhm.
And when that's the mindset, it's wonderful
Yeah.
because you're both focused on meeting each other's needs.
Right.
And so those needs do get met. You're both also focusing on your
Mhm.
own, you know,
Yeah.
accountability and growth areas in the relationship as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, but oh gosh, and that's such a powerful paradigm shift, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
what do I need to work on in order to be a better partner for you and
Right.
meet your needs? And it's almost like this leap of faith, this trust that, and if I do that, I'm going to
Right.
trust you that you will
To do
see
the
me and
same.
care about me and do the
Yeah.
same. Ooh, I just got chills. Well, hey, I know we just have a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to run a situation past you. Okay? And you probably know. So we get all kinds of like listener questions on Instagram or Facebook, or sometimes on the blog at growingself.com. And here's one that came in recently. And this is like an example of, I think, what we were talking about earlier. Like
Okay.
somebody's like, okay, tell me what to do. But here's the question. I'm curious for your take. So, a person writes, what are some strategies for the person in a relationship who didn't show up for years in the way their partner wanted or needed? The other partner tried for years to encourage change, see me, care about me. But now, after so many years of not getting those needs met, they feel really shut down. And the partner who didn't create an emotionally safe environment and respond before now is aware that this is a problem. They're doing all this personal
Right.
growth work and they've apologized. They're now being different. They're taking responsibility. They're listening. They're showing up. But it's not changing the way that I feel. Like it almost feels like it's too late.
Mm.
When you look at that situation from an emotionally focused lens, that's a couple that is
Yeah.
pretty far gone. And that's why I really work hard to don't wait, come in sooner,
Right.
because there
Yeah.
can be that point of no return sometimes in a
Definitely.
couple, which is sad.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if you missed the first memo of get in sooner rather than later, and now you're in the
Right.
situation where you're like, they're changing, but I'm not sure I care anymore.
Yeah.
Still hope for this couple, would you say, from an attachment, emotionally focused lens? And
Yeah.
where would you even start?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would have to start with because in a sense, it's the not showing up for years and
Mhm.
years has created an injury in the relationship. And so then
Mm,
trust has to start to be rebuilt.
yes.
And so I think it's okay for the partner to be burnt out and having trouble, maybe believing this new
Yeah.
side of their partner. I think that's normal because that trust has been broken.
Yeah.
And so I think that it takes rebuilding trust
Mhm.
and being able to, I don't know, I think start to recognize any resentment, maybe even some grieving
Yeah.
from all of those years. And then I think too, there does come a point where, exploring what forgiveness looks like
Mm.
once a lot of the rebuilding trust has happened
Yeah.
as well.
Okay. But just as you said that, and I know from my experience
Yeah.
talking about many months of, even
Yeah.
just being able to articulate,
Mhm.
here is how this injured me. And this is
Right.
what happened to me. And this is why it was so hurtful. And here's why I don't trust you anymore. And even that
Yeah.
can take like months to start to unwind.
Yes.
And then leading into that sort of repairing and
Yeah. And then rebuilding.
rebuilding and forgiving. Okay.
Yeah.
So there it is. It's a perfect example of why. So this person like left this question on the blog. And it's like, okay, Dr. Lisa, what do I do? So the answer is to immerse yourself in experiential process with
Right.
Anastasia to begin to just like peel this onion layer by layer,
Yeah.
experiment with starting to be vulnerable again, even if it is
Right.
only to tell your partner how much you actually hate them and why, and have them hear
Yeah.
that in a different way. This is
Yeah.
the beginning stages of emotionally focused work. And it is not
Definitely.
a simple solution, but I think it's the only meaningful answer or possible. Is that an overstatement? Is that hyperbole? This is the only way to like actually feel this. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I think when it gets to that point, it's hard to see past your own feelings and thoughts about everything. And so having that third person
Mhm.
be able to help navigate through all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with as much empathy and compassion as you. No, really, people are so lucky to get to work with you. And sincerely, I think people don't really know like how it works. And
Yeah.
they do things that just aren't even close to what they
Right.
really need. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, this is like a
Yeah.
public service message to the world. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, of course. No worries. Yeah.
Oh,
And it's funny too, because I think, so I
mhm.
love Real Housewives. There's a
Oh,
few that that I love to watch. And I see in a lot of them where there's been infidelity. And so you see them going to a counselor, but they're going to like their own individual counselor. It's been crazy, actually. There's a few, it's like either they're going to their own individual counselor, or like I watched another couple where they went to a therapist for their relationship. And the therapist was like, literally just, and they actually were vulnerable, especially the partner who tends to withdraw, like opened up. And it was like, great, you opened up. So now we need to figure out how to move on. And I was like, no. Yeah.
oh my gosh. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an interesting conversation as always.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All this love